a weird visual style. I mean, you couldn't animate it, you had to cut out like multiple drawings of the same character back to back. Who would do that? That's so weird. Anyways. Danganronpa is a game and I don't know who it's for. With copious amounts of gore, swearing, and innuendo mixed in with spelling minigames and holding your hand through every trial, it's truly a game that I heard about in middle school, but there was no way I could convince my parents to buy it. Even with that demographic, Danganronpa has a very large following. The reason for that is because Danganronpa has such an interesting concept, aesthetic, characters, plot, and execution. No pun intended. Even after a decade of being out, I don't think any other video game has captured the uniqueness of the first Danganronpa. Also, it's the only mystery game I can think of where the protagonist is canonically stupid. For those who don't know, Danganronpa takes place in a high school. A murder high school. This little bear claims to be their headmaster and says the only way to leave is to get away with murder. Otherwise, the students are trapped here forever. I've seen a lot of people say that this premise is what carries the game. See, the high school in question is called Hope's Peak Academy, which is made up of so-called ultimate students, students that are the best at their craft, whatever that might be. In the original Japanese, it's stated that these are ultimate high school level students, which means these teenagers aren't the best in their field, but they're more similar to prodigies with a lot of potential. Honestly, a lot of these kids do already seem like the best in their field, but I'm sure there would be some questions raised if all of these teenagers couldn't be outmatched by millions of people with more experience and education. This leads to a very eccentric cast of characters, as well as some interesting questions like how do these ultimate talents help you get away with murder? Unless you're Makoto. Makoto is the ultimate guy, as he's just an average high school student who got accepted into this academy by raffle, making him the ultimate lucky student. This feels like a play on making the player character such a blank slate that it's almost laughable, but once you start seeing this dude as an actual character instead of a blank slate, the game becomes so much better for it. For one, Makoto is literally just a guy surrounded by prodigies, and I need you to understand that this guy is a little dumb. Makoto cannot figure out the most basic facts to save his life, and at points it literally is to save his life, and he still needs Kyoko to bail him out. Kyoko Kirigiri is the one carrying Makoto through all the trials. I'm gonna be honest with you, when I first picked up this game as a teenager, I had such a massive crush on her, because she's the only smart one here. She comes into every trial pretty much knowing exactly who did it and how they did it, and she just has to hold your hand and walk you along the path every time. This game is pretty good at convincing you that she's smart too. She picks up on clues that you as the player aren't likely to consider and has her own reasons for coming to the right conclusion, even if she needs more evidence to confirm it for sure. Once you accept the fact that Kyoko is the only smart one here, the trials and the game itself make a lot more sense and become a lot funnier. Alright, I've decided to do a character introduction intermission. I'll try and spice things up with some facts about these characters you wouldn't know on a first playthrough, but there's a lot, so let's speedrun it. The first person you trauma bond with is Sayaka Maizono, the ultimate pop star or the ultimate idol in the original Japanese. You knew her from middle school because you were in the same class. She likes to joke that she's psychic, but she just has really good intuition. But I don't know, we have a clairvoyant here and I think she could outmatch him. Sayaka is extremely motivated and would do anything to keep her place as the top idol, including murder. That's right, Sayaka tries to attempt the first murder, but more on that later. The attempted victim is Leon Kuwata, who is the ultimate baseball star. However, he wants to go into music. Leon's style is based on a more punk rock style in Japan during the early 2010s. He's the only student who seems to outright dislike his talent. Junko Enoshima is the ultimate fashion model, or the ultimate gyaru in Japanese. Gyaru culture is surrounded by following trends and modifying school uniforms. It's very teenage girl-like. We see Junko on magazines and it looks different from her face, which she claims is Photoshop. Junko is the second to die after charging towards Monokuma and attacking him. She gets impaled by spikes from the floor and serves as a martyr and an example for the other students to follow the rules. You might want to keep her in the back of your mind though. Mondo Oshiwada punches you in the face not 2 days into the game. He's the ultimate biker gang leader, or just gang leader in Japanese. He's a bit aggressive, but he would also never hit a woman and states his mother told him if he ever hit a woman, she would kill him. Speaking of, Chihiro Fujisaki is the ultimate programmer. Chihiro created an entire AI during middle school, which really makes me feel inadequate. Chihiro is a bit timid and probably one of the weaker students in the class. Much unlike Sakura, the ultimate martial artist or the ultimate fighter in Japanese. Sakura is one of the more interesting designs in Danganronpa, as her silhouette is very recognizable and a bit out of place for a high school. Sakura is definitely a fan favorite, partially because she's very cool and partially because she's a good friend, a kind soul, and a very motivated individual. If you can't tell, I also like her. Her best friend since the beginning of the game is Aoi Asahina, also known as Hina. She's the ultimate swimmer and was an Olympic cadet in swimming. Hina can get a little heavy on the fan service side, but I never held this against her because it was mostly people or the camera objectifying her. And Hina is always ready and willing to fight back, with words or fists, so I do feel like she has agency as a character and as a person. She also might say some weird things sometimes, but those tend to be more occasional. Unlike Toko Fukawa, the ultimate writer or the ultimate literary girl in Japanese. And let me just say, I'm coming for that title. I want to be the ultimate literary girl. Once I get my master's degree in library sciences, Toko is done for. Toko is a romance author, but she makes her personality much more about making everyone else uncomfortable. Toko has a deep-seated belief that everyone hates her and will often accuse everyone of hating her, and that everyone wishes she would just die. This does not make her more likable. Toko also makes a lot of uncomfortable commentary on Hina and Byakuya. Toko sexualizes both of them to extreme amounts, stalks Byakuya, and will do just about anything he requests other than to stop ogling him. Speaking of which, Byakuya Togami is the ultimate rich guy. Okay, his real title is the ultimate affluent prodigy or ultimate heir. Byakuya comes from a long line of sociopathic rich people, and he does not stray from that. Byakuya is what we in the Danganronpa community call a rival, or an insufferable twink. He is there to butt heads with the protagonist ideologically. Makoto is very emotional and emotionally intelligent, while Byakuya is very logical and closed off, but not in a Kyoko way, in an asshole way. He's very self-centered and focuses very little on the group, but on his own ability to survive. He will purposefully throw the trial to make things more interesting, or just tell you to shut up. Like, all the time. We also have Celestia Ludenberg, the ultimate gambler. I don't know who let a child into a casino, but she's been there for a while. She loves living an elegant lifestyle and sports a gothic Lolita outfit. She's very hot and cold, being able to switch from calm and collected to rage-filled brat when her tea is done wrong. She's one of the smarter characters here, and I promise you everyone here other than Kyoko is a little dumb. Speaking of which, Yasuhiro Hagakure, the ultimate clairvoyant or the ultimate fortune teller in Japanese. This guy has the most questionable of all the talents, as he's only right 30% of the time, but that's something that's interesting about his character. He will predict things correctly in the game, but they happen so rarely that we don't give them much thought. Hiro might be good at fortune telling, but he's very bad at knowing what's going on around him, so it's hard to take him seriously. And so is our next student. Hifumi Yamada is the ultimate fanfic creator, but more accurately, the ultimate doujin artist. This translation leaves some things out. Doujin creators can publish fan manga, fan games, music, art, figures, whatever. Hifumi specifically is a creator of doujin manga. Hifumi is not breaking any stereotypes, unfortunately, which you can probably tell by looking at him. He's nerdy and a bit perverted. Also, his name translates to 123 Mountain Rice Patty, so that's fun. Another victim of odd translation is Kiyotaka Ishimaru, the ultimate moral compass, or in Japanese, the ultimate public morals committee member. I've also heard him referred to as the ultimate hall monitor. Each of these titles have very different inferences, so let's break this good boy down. His grandfather was the prime minister for a hot second before he got caught up in a scandal and quickly left office. After that, their family business crashed and fell into a lot of debt. Taka joined the discipline committee in high school, and it is pretty strict about hard work and good morals. Lastly, we have our mystery 16th student who will come later. For now, we're able to start narrowing down the students with the first trial. Someone is already murdered on the first few nights here. This case is both a great setup as well as a bit troublesome. For example, the most infamous puzzle in the game, the 11037 puzzle, or if you turn it upside down, Leon. In this trial, you have to turn a dying message that is supposedly numbers upside down to reveal the murderer's name. And that's the whole puzzle. This game was originally Japanese, so it was likely more difficult for a Japanese audience, but it's very easy to figure out for an English-speaking audience, and it's one of the last pieces in the puzzle. You don't even solve it. Kyoko tells the class to turn it upside down. During this trial, Makoto is being framed for murder because Sayaka's body is found in his room and there are signs of a struggle there. This is because Sayaka swapped rooms with you that night and invited Leon in to try and kill him. Now, this is a very well thought through scheme by Sayaka because Leon wanted to go into music and Sayaka is the ultimate pop star. Also, this way she can throw Makoto under the metaphorical bus and escape scot-free. However, when all goes south and Leon gets the upper hand, she ends up writing his name on the wall in her own blood to let everyone know who did it. She ends up writing it upside down because of the position she's in. Unfortunately, the last piece of evidence is the most obvious piece in the whole trial. It's not hidden and you don't have to search for a second part. It's just there in the open for everyone to see. And for an English-speaking audience, it's pretty clear what it says from the moment we see it. It can be frustrating for a lot of players because I think they're overlooking one key detail. It's actually hilarious that Makoto can't figure this one out. Makoto is being framed, his life is on the line, and he cannot flip these numbers upside down to save his life. Makoto wants to ask Chihiro about it because they're the ultimate programmer, which is hilarious because it implies that Makoto knows absolutely nothing about coding. So Makoto is very dumb, but he's also very trusting. He's framed for the first murder of the game because he's so trusting. When your new bestie tells you she's scared, Makoto helps her look for a weapon, trades rooms with her, and assures her that he's going to get her out of here no matter what. It's implied that Makoto might not have even had the heart to tell everyone that Sayaka did commit murder if she had gotten away with it. The best part of this trial is learning that Sayaka betrayed you. In hindsight, it should be obvious. Sayaka freaks out over the thought of being trapped here forever. She screams that she needs to get out, she looks for a weapon, and she seemingly, for no reason, attaches herself to Makoto, someone who is very trusting and has no ultimate ability. Unfortunately, the 11037 puzzle can overshadow this twist, but I think it's incredibly smart how the game manages to get Makoto and the player to trust Sayaka considering how much she puts all her cards on the table from the start. Danganronpa, in my opinion, suffers from being incredibly put together in some places and sloppy in others. I think thematically and emotionally, Trial 1 serves as a masterful starting point by tricking the protagonist and the player into thinking that it will follow tropes like being an average guy who has an assistant character who is unexplainably willing to help and respect the player unconditionally. Sayaka is a direct subversion from that trope by purposefully acting as if she's here to assist the player and then pulling the rug out from under him because he's an easy target. However, the actual execution, as in the way this trial plays out, is a bit lackluster. We, the player, know going in who the killer is, we just have to wait the whole trial for Makoto to figure it out. If I were to try and reorder this case, I think a lot of players might prefer being able to point Leon out as the murderer somewhere at the start of the trial. Leon could claim you framed him because the murder was in your room, and then you would have to unravel what really happened and explain why it wasn't your room and how Sayaka set up the murder. From there, Leon could still claim he's being framed, and the ultimate baseball talent of throwing the crystal and use toolbox could be the final nail in the coffin. The game is very adamant about the murderer being the last thing you discover in a trial, but during some trials, especially this one, I think it's a disservice to players who can figure it out fast. But no matter how fast the player can figure it out, we still need Makoto to figure it out too. I know that some players find Makoto's naive and dense nature frustrating because they, as the player, might be able to solve murder faster than Makoto can, but this is also a very interesting character to be the protagonist. Makoto, for some reason, acts more like a blank slate in the beginning of the game and ends up developing a much stronger personality after the first trial. He's very trusting and optimistic, something that you wouldn't expect from a protagonist in a murder trial game. It can explain a bit of why he's so slow at investigating compared to the player, but it also gives him a personality that makes the player understand why he's endearing towards the rest of the cast. Also, I know I sound like a girl trying to sell you on her shitty boyfriend, but please overlook some of the weird things he says in the first chapter. I don't know why they wrote him like that. He never says anything that weird during the rest of the game. Listen, he's not usually like this. I don't know why he said that. Makoto is anything but jaded towards his classmates and the murders of them, which is why I believe he lasts so long into the game. Well, that and Kyoko. But of course, then we get into Trial 2, which has to be one of the most problematic trials in possibly all of the games combined, which I think is saying something. Trial 2 manages to hit some good emotional beats, but at what cost? Okay, I'm going to broach a lot of these topics as delicately as I can, but please understand that the game doesn't, and I'm doing my best to translate its original intent in the most respectful way possible. Trial 2 deals with a lot of concepts around gender, specifically masculinity and what that means. It talks a lot about physical and emotional strength and how it ties into masculinity and the perception of masculinity. Now, these are all interesting concepts to talk about, but the game kind of fumbles it a bit. But first, there's a large red herring in this trial we need to talk about. It's simultaneously very stereotypical and makes some characters more unlikable. The crime scene is set up similarly to how a specific serial killer sets up their crime scenes, that killer being Genocide Jack. Now, here comes two twists that are certainly choices. The first is that the ultimate rich guy, Byakuya, has actually tampered with the crime scene to make it look like it was committed by Genocide Jack, when really it was just a heat-of-the-moment murder by one of the students. This makes Byakuya really hard to tolerate as a character because he actively elongated a fairly long trial and risked all of you getting killed. If Byakuya had assisted in the second half of the trial to help find the murderer, it would have been another story. But Byakuya actively pushes the serial killer narrative while not helping discover who the real murderer is at all. The reason this is so annoying as a player is because it makes the gameplay feel tedious knowing Byakuya did this so he could make things more interesting. Sure, as the player, I want the trial to be interesting, but I also want the trials to have meaning and satisfaction in the answers, and red herrings are typically ways to distract the player without any good reason. They feel superficial and tedious to solve. Of course, this isn't to say that wasn't the point, but it still doesn't make me enjoy the trial anymore. I did say there were two twists, however, and the second twist is that Genocide Jack, or rather Genocide Jill, is actually Toko, the ultimate novelist. Though this isn't done through having her have a hobby of murder, it's done through giving the character dissociative identity disorder and making her counterpart a serial killer. This is a very tired trope, which to be fair probably wasn't as tired when it came out, but honestly it's overused and stigmatizes a very real mental illness. Please don't make people think that everyone with dissociative identity disorder is secretly dangerous and a serial killer. That's just rude. It's even more rude because the game has you spell out what I think is a slur in one of its unnecessary little mini games. Hey, I did some more research. So looking into it, there's a bit more about dissociative identity disorder that isn't brought up in the main game but adds a bit of actual context of using this disorder fictionally. For one, Toko had a traumatic childhood, including being locked in a closet for hours at a time and being tied up to a jungle gym with a garden hose. Trauma and abuse are hypothetical causes for DID, especially in childhood. However, DID is often used to detach from traumatic memories, which we don't really see in Toko. Toko remembers all her traumatic memories, but will pass out at the sight of blood. Granted, there is discussion in the medical community about whether childhood trauma and neglect is really causation or correlation. The causes for a DID are still theories, the most common two being the trauma-related model and the non-trauma-related model, which theorizes that DID is developed through fantasy proneness or influences that relate to role-playing or suggestibility. I'm no doctor, so I can't say which one is true, and I certainly don't have the authority to say that either of these is more valid than the other. If I've said something incorrect, please let me know. I don't mean to generalize or misinform in the slightest. However, Toko can apply to both of those models given that she is the ultimate writer. She is very prone to fantasy and make-believe scenarios. Based on this model, it's likely that Toko's DID stemmed from her ability to create and fantasize. Even though up to this point it appears to be good representation, we still can't overlook the fact that Toko's alter is a serial killer, which is one of the most harmful stereotypes that people with DID face. Toko explains that the first murder she committed was when she wrote a boy a love letter to confess her love to him. The boy posted it in the school to mock her. Later, she blacked out and her alter, Genocide Jack, killed him. Yes, Toko was bullied, but that is an insane leap, and showing signs of violence towards others is not a symptom or a correlation of DID. In fact, it's far more likely that DID victims will harm themselves. In other words, it's completely beyond speculatory. It's just incorrect to assume that people with DID are more violent or likely to be serial killers. Okay, now back to the game with the talking teddy bear and the super genius high school students. This game has minigames, by the way. I think it's interesting to throw them into a mystery visual novel because it's really unnecessary and makes the tone feel a bit off while elongating the trial even more. We have Hangman's Gambit, which is a spelling test, the closing argument, which includes making a little manga strip of what happened, and a rhythm game. There's actually more in later games, but I'm focusing on the first game because there's enough to tackle here. The trials got so long in the next two games that they included intermissions, but in this game they're somewhat manageable. Visual novels don't need minigames to be seen as successful video games. Just look at Ace Attorney. Ace Attorney doesn't include any minigames and instead has the player focus on presenting evidence and objecting to false statements. Those mechanics are very similar to Danganronpa, but in Danganronpa you load your truth bullet into your truth cylinder and fire your truth gun at the truth targets or something. Look, this was made in 2010. It was a little edgy if you couldn't tell. But I did lie. There is one more twist. I hesitate to call it a twist because I don't like how the game dramatizes it. It's treated as a shocking revelation that changes everything we know about a character, and it's uncomfortable. The murder victim Chihiro is biologically male. Now, I'm going to talk about this very carefully because frankly this case isn't very cut and dry. Chihiro considered themselves to be weak, so they took on a female identity to avoid harassment from people calling them weak. Now, this could easily be seen as a trans character. The game doesn't really confirm how Chihiro wanted to identify. They treat Chihiro's female identity more as something that they did out of shame. Chihiro has an AI program that refers to them as he, him, so it could be implied that it really was out of shame and that they would like to be seen as a man. They just are insecure about their own masculinity. However, I've heard multiple trans women identify with this struggle early in their journeys and say that they see Chihiro as a trans woman who still needs to come to terms with her identity. I really don't have the authority to make the call on what take is correct here. I think trans women who see themselves and their mentality in Chihiro is valid, especially considering Chihiro is a high school student and probably hasn't explored the idea of being trans that much, if at all. But I also can't prove people who interpret this as Chihiro being a man who's insecure about his masculinity as wrong. It's not really my place to speculate on these things, so if it's alright, I'm gonna use they them pronouns for Chihiro because I'm unsure of what to go by here. Anyways, they are murdered. Editor's note: while the English version doesn't really use any language other than cross-dresser to refer to Chihiro, the Japanese version does use some transphobic language. I just wanted to mention that quickly because this game is a little bit biased on trans people and their identities. The murder turns out to be a heat-of-the-moment action by Mondo, the ultimate biker gang leader. The reason this works on hitting emotional beats is because the killer forms a platonic relationship with Taka before the murder takes place. The climax of this trial is Taka begging Makoto not to accuse Mondo and begging Monokuma not to kill his friend. Mondo easily accepts his punishment and his accusation, but Taka doesn't. The well-written aspect of this trial is the connections with the characters and the question of strength. Mondo is said to be weak for killing someone innocent in a moment of anger because of the emotional stress of the motive. The motive for this trial is blackmail. A large secret for every character would be announced to the world. Mondo's secret is that he is accidentally responsible for the death of his older brother, who was killed in a car accident during a race between him and Mondo. Meanwhile, Chihiro decided to become stronger because their identity as being biologically male would come to light, so Chihiro wanted to fit more into the strong masculine binary. Chihiro came to Mondo for help, saying that they came to Mondo because he's strong and wouldn't let the blackmail affect him. And Mondo, in a fit of rage, freaked out because he thought Chihiro was calling him weak. Mondo blacks out and hits Chihiro over the head with a dumbbell. Oopsie. While Mondo isn't the most sympathetic culprit ever, what makes this trial sympathetic is that Taka and Mondo had a real friendship and bond, and Taka has to live with the fact that his closest friend, who he's never shared this kind of bond with, is gone. Worse, he's a murderer. This emotional beat would have been great if it hadn't been preceded with a really long trial padded out with two incredibly uncomfortable tropes that really didn't age well. Mondo's execution is a reference to the story of the little black Sambo. In this story, a young boy named Sambo runs into a pack of tigers. Sambo gives up his colorful clothes so the tigers will spare him. The tigers dress up in them and claim they look better than the others. This leads to an argument and the tigers chase each other around so fast that they're reduced into a pool of butter, which Sambo's mom puts on pancakes. I think this reference is made to compare Mondo to the tigers in Vanity. So obsessed with his own image to the world, Mondo committed a murder without any forethought. He sealed his fate by focusing on the motive and his own feelings. He wanted so badly to prove that he was stronger than Chihiro and his brother, he ended up acting rash, which led to his death. This is also hinted at by the fact that his gang is called the Crazy Tigers. Mondo and Leon both work at being morally gray killers. Leon was attacked first and wasn't even told that everyone would die if he got away with it. From his perspective, he probably assumed only Sayaka would die and he could leave. Also, when Sayaka attacked him, he defended himself. He walked away unscathed and Sayaka fled with a broken wrist. That's not a good look, and you don't know how Sayaka would use that against him. Of course, as pointed out by Celeste, Leon still didn't have to kill Sayaka. He could have just walked away. But we can at least understand that it was a very tense, emotionally driven decision for Leon. The same could be said about Mondo to a slightly lesser extent. He did know that his murder would get everyone killed if he got away with it, but he does fess up faster, which makes him a bit more respectable. These killers feel genuinely morally gray, which makes them interesting. Meanwhile, our next killer is a very dark shade of gray. Our next trial has 2 murders, which will be a staple of Trial 3s in Danganronpa games. Danganronpa isn't free of third case syndrome. Third case syndrome was coined by Ace Attorney fans, I believe. It's just a way of saying that the third case is usually a bit lacking in games. The reason why is probably because it's in the middle before a very important case and after establishing the status quo. For example, in the first Ace Attorney game, the first trial is a tutorial that teaches you the ropes and the characters. The second trial is an emotional beat, as a character you've come to know and love is killed. And while the fourth trial is an emotional beat for Miles Edgeworth by showing his character growth, the third trial is made to establish the norm. So while the game might try to do something interesting, it's also forced to set up the normal trial, so to speak, because it's the calm before the storm. In Danganronpa, the first trial serves as the tutorial to set up both the gameplay, atmosphere, and themes of the game. Sayaka's trial was meant to set up the concept of an assistant while also showing the immediate betrayal and emotional beat of losing that assistant, setting up the themes of trust and betrayal. The second trial serves as an emotional beat of both having a sympathetic killer and an unsympathetic classmate, further pushing the theme of trust and betrayal, now from one of the living students. However, the third trial really doesn't push these themes in any way. Instead, it tries to shock the player with 2 murders. While it may work in the short term, it also makes the trials a bit easier to decode, considering now we have twice the evidence to go off of. The third murder begins with a giant robot attacking Celeste. It will make slightly more sense later. Apparently, this Gundam-style robot attacks Celeste with a hammer and kidnapped Hifumi. Celeste proves this with a photo she took using Hifumi's camera. Later, they split up and look for the robot man and find Hifumi dead at the same time that the other group finds Taka dead. Makoto goes up to check on the other group while Celeste takes Hina away from the dead body. When both groups run back down to Hifumi's body, they find it's gone missing. Both bodies turn up in a different room. Hifumi actually comes back to life for a second to say the name of the murderer is Yasuhiro, which is pretty damning for Hiro, because that is his name. Hiro is also shoved into the robot costume, which is basically zip-tied shut, so the man has pretty obviously been framed for it. Kyoko was also absent for this murder, but it's Kyoko, and Makoto and I are equally in love with her, so it can't be her. We can determine that the first time Hifumi was found dead, he faked his death, considering that someone had to get the body up a flight of stairs and avoid being seen in about 5 minutes. We can also find his glasses cloth covered in blood in the trash, and his glasses were wiped clean when they found the body a second time. So Hifumi is in on this murder, but why? Well, because he was the one who killed Taka. But it wasn't really his plan. Celeste managed to play him like a fiddle, and the reason is because she's the ultimate gambler and has a really good poker face. We already knew that Hifumi was easily manipulated by Celeste, but here she plays her cards very purposefully. Chihiro left an AI called Alter Ego for the class classmates to use. It can get some information from the laptop it's on, but it can also be plugged into the network to get more intel. It also looks like Chihiro is able to replicate Mondo, meaning the ever-depressed Taka grows attached to the image of Mondo, and Hifumi interprets alter ego as a girl that actually likes listening to him as he mansplains his hobbies. This man got caught up in the AI girlfriend trend before the AI girlfriend trend became a thing. Celeste steals the laptop and tells Hifumi that Taka made her do it with blackmail, that he abused her. This plays into Hifumi's hero complex by being able to feel like he's saving someone, both Celeste and alter ego. I really like how this is how they use Celeste's ultimate talent. Not directly gambling, but being able to lie very well and strategically playing others around her. The only problem is that Hifumi had to manga artist it all up by adding lore to his deck. That Gundam he made is his original OC Please Do Not Steal. Though actually there might be proof of Robo Justice being a character on an anime that Hifumi liked, considering he refers to the anime beforehand, which is crazy foreshadowing. Now where Celeste's plan falls apart is she has to take the fall for having proof of the robot kidnapping Hifumi, something that was staged, as well as being attacked and seeing the robot man. The final clue is something I consider a little silly. Hifumi sure did say Yasuhiro killed him, but that's because in death he got all his school memories back and remembered that Celestia Ludenberg isn't actually Celeste's legal name. Instead, her name is Yasuhiro. I don't know. The fake French name may or may not have been obvious to Japanese fans, but it seems awfully coincidental that Hiro's first name is Celeste's last name. Like, come on. Her execution begins like a witch burning before Celeste gets hit with a fire truck. This is meant to represent how Celeste wants every bit of her life, including her death, to be a spectacle, but she ends up going out in a car accident, which is very common. But I don't know how many people have gotten hit with a fire truck, so at least there's that. It doesn't quite match her aesthetic though, which I do believe is a big deal for her. The motive for this trial was actually money, specifically $10 million. The player isn't likely to pin Celeste as someone who would need money due to her extravagant lifestyle and aesthetic, but that's exactly why she wants the money. For a fairly simple motive, I think it's a good one, but it could definitely be seen as underwhelming if you're looking for something deeper. I really like how Celeste was portrayed in this trial. She uses her ultimate talent in an interesting way and very graciously gives up once everyone decides she's the killer. The motive also suits her because Celeste went into gambling to live an extravagant lifestyle and to earn as much money as possible. It's something that the player wouldn't immediately suspect if they're not thinking too hard, but it makes total sense for Celeste. However, due to the lack of suspects, the trial seems a bit simple despite being overly complex. Celeste seems to object to everything the player says, so the player is likely to suspect her. In my opinion, the second and third trials are the weakest in the bunch because they really don't further the overarching plot or themes and meta-narrative. But that's where Trial 4 really shines. The motive for Trial 4 is that Monokuma reveals the traitor living among the students is Sakura. It's not by will. Monokuma decided to hold Sakura's family dojo hostage, which of course is incredibly important to Sakura. Her only task was to kill someone and start off the killing game, but Sayaka beat her to it by trying to kill someone on one of the first nights. Monokuma still has the dojo hostage and could request Sakura to kill someone at any time, but it is unlikely that she would do it now. Now, Makoto actually knew this beforehand, not because of any deductive skill, but because he stumbles upon her and Monokuma fighting as she's decided that she doesn't want to be his spy anymore. Of course, Kyoko knows you know something. And you know Kyoko knows that you know. But she doesn't know what you know. And despite the game pretending to give you a choice, you really don't have one as the game doesn't allow you to tell her. So now your girlfriend's mad at you. What the heck, Makoto? The truth eventually comes to light, and Kyoko is less mad at you, but now no one trusts Sakura, which is a shame because she is lovely. As the ultimate martial artist though, she is a little scary. Everyone except for her best friend Hina, well, best friend depending on what lighting you're in, are very wary of her. This leads to some violence between everyone, and Hina gives Byakuya a well-deserved slap in the face for being a jerk. Later, Toko attacks Hina in Genocide Jack form. Sakura is obviously upset by her best friend being attacked and offers people a time and place to meet up. But her body is found after that time, locked in a room. Specifically the room she said she would meet up with everyone in. Though it's technically not locked, there's a propped up chair preventing the door from opening. During the trial, you learn that both Hiro and Toko met up with and attacked Sakura separately. but neither blows killed her. Later, she meets up with Hina and asks her to run down and get some protein for her. In that time, Sakura leaves a note, locks the room, and poisons herself. Considering she left a note behind for Hina, this case should be cut and dry, but there were two saboteurs. The first is Monokuma, who replaced the note left by Sakura. Instead, he left a note pretending to be Sakura and claiming she went out angry and upset at the other students. Now, there's a lot to be said about this. For one, Monokuma did sabotage the trial, but he did it so in a very careful way. He didn't sign the note, implying it was from Sakura, but he did leave it for Hina to find. He took away Sakura's note because he knew that would end the trial swiftly. And instead, he left his own note that would make Hina upset, and it worked very well. Because the second sabotage is that Hina purposefully makes it look like Sakura was poisoned by adding a protein can to the scene after the room is opened and switching the contents of the protein powder and the poison to make it look like they were altered. These things make it look like the poison was actually switched out with the protein and Sakura drank the poison accidentally. Hina's reasoning is because she's aware that 2 out of the 5 surviving people made an attempt to kill Sakura, and Byakuya also said Sakura's death might be a good thing for them. Hina has been especially close to Sakura since Trial 1. The night of the first murder, Hina invited Sakura over to spend the night because she was scared and trusted Sakura from the beginning. Throughout the game, they've been fairly inseparable. They formed a very close bond and have always stood up for each other. When Sakura dies, Hina takes it hard and blames the people around her, and she's not entirely wrong in doing so. Considering Sakura did what she did because no one trusted her and her presence would lead to more murder. If everyone had been as trusting and understanding towards Sakura as Hina or Makoto, there wouldn't have been a problem. But only Hina had that kind of bond and friendship with Sakura, so of course the others were suspicious. But thinking that Sakura went out betrayed and heartbroken really made Hina upset, and she would rather kill everyone than let Sakura's death go without any punishment for the students that drove Sakura to ending things. In my opinion, this trial does a very good job at setting up a lot of distortion around what should be a simple trial. Hiro and Toko complicate things a bit, but they also serve as the motive for both Hina and Sakura's actions. Seeing the reactions that her friends have to her, even the thought that they might actually kill her and continue the killing game, led to Sakura deciding to end herself in hopes that no one would get hurt in the process. Sakura made it pretty clear that her goal is to protect Hina. The idea that Hina could get murdered by one of these people or die in a class trial because of Sakura's death is definitely what pushed Sakura to do what she did. Meanwhile, Hina acts this way because she saw her friend beat over the head twice after she was vulnerable enough to invite the untrusting people in to talk to her. They were people with clear motives for murder, but she still took that risk and suffered for it. For the person you love and care about most to die, not at the hands of someone else, but herself after she had been attacked by half of the others, it only makes sense that Hina would consider the class responsible for her death. I think Hina's setup works leagues above Byakuya's setup because of this clear motive. While Byakuya framed Toko to his own downfall at the first half of the trial, Hina frames herself during the second half of the trial. This works in many different ways. To start, the 2 red herrings beforehand, Toko and Hiro, serve as the motive, making it more valuable than Byakuya's stunt, which added nothing to the actual murder, but did add more work to the trial. It feels more satisfying to know there was a reason behind those red herrings and they weren't inconsequential. Next, having Byakuya sabotage at the beginning of the trial makes it feel like we've gotten nowhere by the time we discovered it was all a red herring. It actively regresses the trial and undoes the evidence we've uncovered. Meanwhile, Hina's red herring is at the end of the trial and leads to the real solution of how she sabotaged everything. The victim was poisoned, but we misjudged who did it because of the evidence that was placed after the body was already discovered. Hina's red herring actually gets us to the solution because of how tied to the murder it was. Finally, Hina's motivation feels much more built up and sympathetic than Byakuya's do during the second trial. For one, Hina and Sakura's friendship is built up since the start of the game. She has a much more emotionally driven motivation than Byakuya, who literally just did it to make the game more interesting and see who's good at solving trials. Speaking of Byakuya, his character arc really works in this trial, in my opinion anyways. Byakuya is very confident through the trial that the culprit is Hina. It's ironic considering he's falling for a setup not too different from his own. I think Byakuya's character can be interesting because he serves as a stand-in for the player. Byakuya explains that he views the events taking place as a game. He has full intent to win it and also wants it to be interesting. This probably parallels the player's own thoughts as well. Terrible as it might be, you're playing this game because you're looking for an interesting story, and while you might not enjoy seeing your favorite characters get killed off, chances are from a meta standpoint, you're waiting for it to happen to make the plot progress. You also want the murders to be interesting. Chances are, if the second trial had been Byakuya saying that he saw Mondo walk away from the body, the player wouldn't have liked it because the trial would have been boring. Byakuya plays the game completely detached from it, making the game more interesting from a player standpoint. He also likes to play around the meta the same way that players do. During the fourth trial, most players likely thought it couldn't be Togo or Hiro because that was too obvious. From there, the obvious candidate is Hina because she had the opportunity and because for some reason it's just never Byakuya. But from a meta standpoint, having Hina be the culprit would throw the player off the most because of their long-stated friendship. It would be a total shock and betrayal to the player. However, these characters aren't pawns used to give the audience a shocking story. They're made to be deep and complex people with meaningful relationships and motives. Hina's relationship with Sakura wasn't fake, and Hina has no motive for killing Sakura. The foreshadowing that Sakura's death was by her own hands is there. When we first find Sakura dead, she looks almost angelic as she's sitting peacefully with a smile on her face. From this moment, I knew it had to have been a choice by the victim herself. Though I have heard people say that they didn't even think that and jumped to the conclusion that the reason she looked so at peace was because her last conversation was with Hina and she was tricked. Even though I was able to piece together what happened pretty quickly, I completely understand everyone who didn't because you have to think outside the box for a bit. The game sets up a very distinct formula that it breaks this trial by not having a culprit. It also puts players into two different categories, players that judge the story based on characters and players that judge the story based on the meta. This trial used that opportunity to compare the players to both Makoto and Byakuya. Byakuya instantly jumps to the conclusion that it's Hina without really needing a clear motive. For the first few trials, we didn't address the motive until after the killer had been revealed. But here we don't have a motive for Hina and it feels out of character for her to kill Sakura. Makoto, upon learning it's Hina, immediately asks why, and when Hina gives her answer, he doesn't really believe it and says that something's wrong about this case. Hina claims that when she was getting the protein, it just dawned on her that she could kill Sakura, which isn't a very elaborate motive, and doesn't make sense. The idea that Hina would randomly think that she could kill her best friend and decide to do it is incredibly out of character and out of left field. The reason that Makoto says something's wrong about this account is that he isn't taking the meta into account. He's not asking what would be the most interesting twist or who could use their reputation to their advantage to trick Sakura. He wonders why Hina would do this when she has no reason to. I think this is the best use of Byakuya's character and the character foil between him and Makoto that this game has to offer. This is a moment that the player has a chance to understand Byakuya's character because it aligns closely with the mentality of the player who's detached and just wants to see the game play out with no regard for the characters. The actual protagonist of the game is what the developers of the game likely want their ideal player to be like, and is what the player of these types of games should be. He's someone that gets invested in the characters and doesn't treat them acting out of character as a twist to aid murder, but he sees them acting out of character and asks for the in-game explanation why. These types of games likely have players nitpicking small details in trials, and they should. It's a mystery game. But the problem is when those details are at the fault of the writers making mistakes instead of a genuine clue in the trial. And here, someone acting out of character is not a mistake of the writing, it's a hint that something is wrong. And to understand that coming in, you have to trust the game to have good writing. So I completely understand people believing it's Hina the same way I understand going in and knowing the culprit is Sakura. This trial is great for Hina, Sakura, and Byakuya's character, especially because Sakura's death carries a lot of meaning. This is the last murder the class ever commits. Sakura writes in her note that she believes the class will carry on without any more murders, and she was the one thing stopping that. Furthermore, her death is not without meaning, as Sakura first broke the door to the headmaster's office. Breaking school property is against the rules and could result in her being killed, so Sakura decided to break the rules considering she was going out anyways. Everyone respects what she did for them and vows to not kill anyone. Even Byakuya says that he's choosing to give up on playing this killing game to keep everyone alive. This is when Byakuya's character goes from somewhat insufferable to playfully argumentative. In my opinion, they made Byakuya too jarring and abrasive for him to be very likable towards most players in the first half of the game. While this may have been a conscious decision, he feels like he's ramped up all the way to 10 on the scale of being abrasive and patronizing to a level that exceeds cartoonish. The Byakuya we see from this point on is a much lighter version, which can be likable to the players. He no longer verbally assaults you for speaking and is willing to listen to people who have good points, even if he still can be a little stubborn and irritable. I think they should have found a middle ground between this Byakuya and the insufferable twink Byakuya in the first half of the game. That way he would have seemed less like he was spouting rich, asshole-generated lines. But I digress, this case does wonders for him. There are 2 more trials from here on out, and I know what you're thinking, person who definitely hasn't played the game and has come this far in the video, but you said there were no more murders. I did. I wasn't lying. Actually, Chihiro states that his clairvoyant senses tell him no murders will take place before Sakura's death, and he's technically right depending on how you classify Sakura's death. Also, since we don't have anyone to execute for this crime, Monokuma destroys Alter Ego, who was able to connect to the network but was discovered and disconnected shortly after. This works in the themes of hope and despair, which have been slowly becoming more obvious through the game's progression. At the beginning, the idea is that all these students are plunged into an incredibly dark situation filled with despair. There is some semblance of hope for the students in finding a way out. This hope is furthered by Alter Ego and its ability to help them out of there, but when it's crushed, we can see this being undone. However, this is a turning point for the characters who have new points of hope, 1 being Sakura's sacrifice, and 2 being their new drive to live peacefully. To start off, we learn that Sakura busted open the door to the headmaster's office. We also get access to another floor, where there's a knife in one of the rooms, and everyone decides that Makoto should hold onto it because, look at him. He would never. I'm sure this won't come back to haunt us later. Kyoko goes and steals a file of a student who we don't know about yet, and a skeleton key for the building. Kyoko doesn't share this with anyone other than Makoto because she trusts him again. I could make a whole video about this duo's dynamic, it's so good and funny at the same time, but with Kyoko finding more clues and classmates getting along, you'd think there would be no more tension in the group. But there's one secret Kyoko hasn't revealed, which is her ultimate talent. Now again, to the player, it honestly should be pretty obvious what her talent is. Kyoko is always the one who solves the mysteries, who examines the body, who notices little details. Come on, what do you think her ultimate talent is? It also helps that her outfit makes her look like someone decided to draw a schoolgirl in a 1920s detective movie. All that aside, Byakuya confronts Kyoko about this and seems like he just genuinely wants the answer, but he also threatens to take her room key unless she tells him, which is basically committing suicide in a murder school, but Kyoko did sleep with her door opened when Alter Ego was around to make sure it didn't get stolen. Kyoko says that she can't reveal it, and when Byakuya makes the threat to take her room key, Kyoko just hands it over. She leaves before it can prompt a discussion, which is interesting because I think Byakuya didn't really want to take her room key from her. He's just terrible at negotiating. Kyoko then goes missing. No one can find her, not even Monokuma. Makoto does get sick though, probably because he's been away from Kyoko for so long. I get it, man, I miss her too. During his fever, he sees a masked assailant looming over him, with the knife that we were put in charge of. Well, I'm sure that won't come back to haunt us either. We kinda black out, but then we see Kyoko standing over us with the masked assailant missing, and though she's saying things to us, we can't really understand what she's saying. Probably that she loves us or something like that, I don't know. When we wake up, the knife is gone and so is Kyoko. Everyone who isn't Kyoko is in the gym dismembering Monokuma. Apparently Monokuma was sitting there lifeless in the gym, meaning there was no one controlling him. So our friends came along and took him apart. There's also a bomb inside him. I'm sure this won't come back to haunt us later. Chekhov is a gun enthusiast in this game. We then find a masked body in the garden. It's stabbed through the chest with the knife from your room. Considering Kyoko is missing, you might determine that the body is hers. But actually the bomb is there and explodes the corpse, making at least the face unrecognizable. The rest of the body gets put out first, so it's still intact. What's upsetting is that because Kyoko's not here, no one wants to touch the corpse. Guys, it's a murder trial. You have to touch the corpse. You're all gonna die, you can bring yourselves to examine the corpse. Since Kyoko isn't here for the investigation, we don't have a body examination or a good idea of what's going on. We don't even know who the victim is. It could be Kyoko or the 16th student, or maybe there's another explanation. Makoto is immediately suspicious again though, because while he was sleeping in his room, the other four were together the whole time. For a moment, we see that Monokuma has stopped working, and the students assume that maybe the dead body is of the mastermind. The body discovery announcement also doesn't play even though you find the body together. However, eventually Monokuma reveals that he's back online and plays the body discovery announcement long after the body is found. The Monokuma file states that the body faced several injuries, including being hit over the head with a blunt object, the stab wound from the knife, the explosion, and other wounds that are at least a few days old. It gives us no other information. The player might think that this game is trying to artificially scale up the difficulty, or it's making a mistake by not playing the body discovery announcement when the body is found. But all of this evidence being hidden is actually part of the overall murder mystery. It's incredibly likely that the player will overlook this explanation or just not understand how this could tie into the case though. Keep that in the back of your mind. What we do find is a bunch of arrows taped together in a locker, the key to that locker being in Kyoko's room. There's blood on the tape, which isn't a good look for Kyoko. The other thing is that in Kyoko's room is the file for the 16th student, which states she has a wolf tattoo on her hand, something that can be found on the corpse's hand. So now we know the victim. That's honestly all the evidence we have, other than the fact that the sprinkler system in the garden goes off in the morning when we were with the group, and there's a tarp that's dirty on one side. With that, we go into the trial with a serious lack of evidence. One piece of evidence we do get though comes walking in at the last second. Kyoko shows up just as Monokuma is about to throw a tantrum. She states that she was investigating the 5th floor dorms, which were previously closed off and has no cameras or monitors. So Kyoko didn't even realize a body had been discovered. She quickly looked over the body but had to rush to the class trial, so she really doesn't have more evidence that we do. We unfortunately have to spend several minutes convincing Hiro that the corpse isn't Kyoko because he believes that Kyoko is a ghost, and so we actually have to use real evidence to prove it to him. This detour isn't appreciated by the characters or the players. It pads out the trial in a very, very stupid argument. We don't exactly have a lot of evidence to go off of in this trial, but the group decides the cause of the body is probably blunt force trauma that came before the explosion and after the wounds that are several days old. It can't be the stab wound because the knife was lodged into the body with a coat over it and the blood is fake. The blood actually comes from a chicken in the garden. One was missing from the coop, so now we know where it went. Meanwhile, we completely overlook the wounds that are at least a few days old because the suspect is the ultimate soldier and we assume she has some battle scars. This trial is very speculative. We deduct the cause of death using process of elimination. It's all that we have to go on. In a game like Ace Attorney, this gameplay would be a bit annoying, but it makes sense for a game like Danganronpa because this is a life or death class trial. We don't need to follow the legal system, we just need to make a guess by the end of the trial. In this case specifically, that speculation is important because we have so little to go off of, and that's on purpose. The only two suspects the group can think of are Makoto and Kyoko, considering they're the only two without an alibi. The whole trial, we're expecting to see Kyoko pull out some evidence that clears her name and reveals the truth about this trial. But Kyoko actually starts to accuse you. She doesn't state that you did it, but she undoes any proof that you set up for yourself. You managed to make an alibi for yourself by saying that the sprinklers went off when you had already met up with the group, meaning you couldn't have killed the body because the sprinklers would have made the body wet and extinguished the flames caused by the bomb. However, Kyoko argues that there was a dirty tarp at the scene, so the culprit could have covered the body during the sprinklers and then taken the tarp off later. This song and dance continues with Makoto making an alibi for himself and Kyoko tearing his argument down. It's a jarring moment because Kyoko will usually lead the trial, so here having her lead it against you is intimidating. It's not like you can pull her aside and ask why she's doing this. Every defense for your own innocence is torn down, and though you might be able to determine how the killer must have set up the scene, you get no closer to their actual identity. Now, the final nail in the metaphorical coffin has to be the locker key in Kyoko's room if you accept the fact that the murder weapon is the bundle of arrows taped together. But if you've forgotten, Byakuya has Kyoko's room key and he was with the group the entire time. So even if you bring up that evidence, it actually turns back on you because you were the first to discover the locker key when you were investigating it with Byakuya. This means that you could have planted the evidence in her room and pretend like you found it there. Now, as the player, you know that Kyoko has a skeleton key that could have let her into her room. Kyoko lies and says she wouldn't have been able to get into her room because Byakuya has her key, but you can reveal the truth. However, that would mean fully accusing Kyoko. School life has taught us that no one is to be trusted, that everyone is a suspect, even someone we would consider our assistant and our closest companion. But even knowing that, Kyoko has always been the one to get us out of these predicaments and has come to trust us despite everything. Here, the player has one final choice. We can take the hardships and the lesson of this experience and choose to accept Kyoko as the killer because of the evidence we have, or we can choose to stay optimistic and trusting like Makoto at the start of the game, and believe that this isn't Kyoko's doing because she's our friend and we believe we know her. Kyoko tells the class that if they vote for her, the mysteries of this school will go unsolved. In my opinion, I think this works well with the morals that someone might take away from this game depending on which trial impacted them more. If a player really trusted Sayaka and was heartbroken by her betrayal, they might take away that no one is to be trusted, not even your closest companion. However, anyone impacted by the death of Sakura and the fact that Hino would never kill her, and it would be out of character for her to do so, might end up trusting the character more than the setup. This case is so much more speculative. We can assume that Kyoko has a motive if she believed Mukuro, the 16th student, was the mastermind, or even that she might have been trying to protect Makoto. Even if that is the case, would she really lie to cover it up now? With so little evidence, why should we declare it's Kyoko? Especially when Kyoko begins claiming that something is wrong with this trial. Should we really be distrusting Kyoko when there's a violent, evil person controlling this scenario? To the game's credit, it does actually give you a choice in this moment. You can choose to bring up the key or you can stay quiet. I can't fault the player for either decision here, but one answer will lead the player to a bad end. If you choose to reveal the evidence that Kyoko had a skeleton key, the trial comes to an abrupt halt, and everyone votes out Kyoko. She accepts her fate, but says that the class has made a mistake and they've fallen into the mastermind's trap. Still, Monokuma claims that the class got it correct and sends Kyoko off to her execution, being taught one final lesson before a giant machine comes down and squashes her. Makoto narrates that after that there were no more murders. For the rest of their lives, you and your friends live out their lives in peace. You live in a school together forever, never able to escape and complicitly going along with Monokuma's orders until they eventually stop. This narration is met with a very uncomfortable image of all the remaining students grown up and with children that are implied to be the offspring of Hina and every other guy in the place, and Byakuya holding a picture of Toko in memorial to imply that she died of natural causes. This ending is actually foreshadowed by Hiro in his free time dialogue with Makoto, that the mother of their children will be the same woman. Luckily, Hiro is only correct 30% of the time, and in the true ending, we don't bring up the key. I do think it's funny that Hiro's correct 30% of the time because this is actually a 1 out of 3 choice. One of your choices is to bring up the key, another is to stay silent, and the third is to run away, which actually doesn't do anything. It just leads you back to the first two. So Hiro being right 30% of the time is accurate. If we don't bring up the key, Monokuma quickly ends the trial, claiming that the time is up. Kyoko brings up that there's never been a time limit before, but Monokuma is quick to let her know that this is punishment for Kyoko showing up late to the trial. He demands the vote here and now without any further discussion. From here, it should be pretty clear that this trial is being rigged. We still don't know why, though. This trial is unlike the others because it seems created with the intent of making the students guess wrong. And that suspicion is proven correct as everyone votes for Makoto and Monokuma says that it's the right conclusion. We obviously know this is a lie, but we can't do anything about it. We desperately look to Kyoko for help and she apologizes. She says she doesn't expect Makoto to forgive her, but she knew one of them had to take the fall and she couldn't risk the mysteries of this school not getting uncovered. Yes, Kyoko did sacrifice you. But first of all, she is so right for that. We saw real confirmation that Makoto would never have been able to figure out what was going on in the school and would have just started repopulating without even like 20 years in. There's no way this Scooby-Doo mystery gang could ever solve this thing without Kyoko here. You could argue that Kyoko didn't know the trial would end so quickly, so she just wanted to stall voting until she could figure out what was going on. But even if she did set Makoto up, she's right for doing so considering it's Makoto, who has been piggybacking off of her since the beginning of the game. If there's any hope in solving this, we need Kyoko alive. Look, she's not nice, she's not good, she's just right, and I think we should support her in her sacrifice of us. Kyoko has never done anything wrong in her life, and I love her. Without too much talk, Monokuma sends us off to execution. Everyone seems genuinely surprised that it could be Makoto. Even Byakuya doesn't seem to want to believe it. He actually spent most of the trial defending you. All that being said, your execution starts, the same one as Kyoko's. This time, as you close your eyes and prepare for a quick death, Alter Ego is shown on a monitor and the press stops. Instead, the floor opens up and drops you down a trash chute. The ultimate lucky student indeed. Makoto's luck has always been very interesting in this game because it appears as bad luck. His bathroom door gets stuck, which Monokuma points out is ironic considering he's the ultimate lucky student. But this clue actually helps us find out who the killer is and gave Sayaka time to write down Leon's name. Makoto getting accused of murder isn't great, but he isn't executed because of Alter Ego's intervention, which means that the bad end doesn't have to occur. And Makoto is trapped in a murder school, but maybe that's lucky too, and we'll get to that later. Makoto wastes away for a whole 24 hours before Kyoko comes to save him. She brings food and water and also her skeleton key. She is able to unlock a door which leads to a ladder. Kyoko reveals that she had forgotten her ultimate talent and why she even came to the school in the first place, but that recently she remembered everything. She's the ultimate detective. Shocker, I know. And her father is the headmaster of Hope's Peak Academy. She had somehow forgotten all of this when she woke up at the very beginning of the game. She comes from a long line of detectives, but her father abandoned her to run Hope's Peak Academy. Her grandparents raised her to be a detective. This may seem pretty fantastical, but please consider that Mukuru was possibly kidnapped and joined an elite mercenary team in the Middle East, and Byakuya comes from a long line of rich people who have the male heir have as many children with as many women as possible, and make them all physically fight it out for the inheritance while the losers are exiled. I'm not exaggerating, in fact, I'm probably downplaying it. They're all a little weird. When we get back into the school, it's clear that we're not going to be able to hide, as Kyoko points out there's already cameras watching us. So what can we do other than confront Monokuma? He could send us to our deaths, but what other choice do we have? So we waltz up to Monokuma and Kyoko gives him the intellectual what for. See, Monokuma has cameras everywhere and we find a TV with nothing but camera footage broadcasted on it. Monokuma tells us that we're being broadcast live to everyone. You have to ask yourself why that would be. Despite the dystopian forms of entertainment, both fictional and real at this point, there should always be some kind of reasoning behind it. Now, even at the beginning of the game, when he's asked what he wants from the students, he responds, despair. That's all. Now, we know he's broadcasting this live for some reason, and that he has an extensive set of rules for the students to follow, but we also know that he's rigged the last trial. So this can't be some sort of sick social experiment, he wants a specific outcome. But then why the rules if he wants the outcome so badly? Why did he set up the rules this way? Well, that has to be to prove a point. He's acting like a poor scientist, changing the rules of an experiment and fudging the results to prove his hypothesis right. But he cheated so much that it's clear to both the characters and the audience watching that he's changing the results. So Kyoko calls for a redo of the trial. If he doesn't comply, then everyone watching will know his experiment failed and whatever point he's trying to prove is wrong. Kyoko sees his bluff and calls it. With that, we get a redo of the trial with more evidence open and no time limit. You all reunite and now you have a murder to solve. For one, the headmaster's office is now open for everyone to see, in which we find the second half of Mukuru's profile. We find that Mukuru was the ultimate soldier, but didn't face any serious battle injuries before going into the school. That's why she's considered an ultimate. However, she was suspected to be from a group that's called the Ultimate Despair. We also get a hint by Monokuma, which is a picture of the entire class other than Makoto. This photo is given to Makoto specifically, and it shows all of his classmates in a classroom that isn't boarded up wearing school uniforms. We've been seeing more and more evidence like this pop up. It's evidence that points to there being some kind of bond between students before they got here. This is furthered by the fact that we can now open the lockers. In two of them we find Hiro's school notes and Kyoko's pocketbook that they say they don't remember writing in. We also find a DVD with an interview where we can see almost all of the students agree to living a full life at Hope's Peak Academy forever. But Monokuma cuts the TV off before we can finish it. We still don't see a few students make the verbal contract with the headmaster to stay forever. The biggest piece of evidence we get is that there's a cadaver in the school with all the bodies of their classmates. They're all placed into slots with lights indicating which ones are in use. Mukuru's body is available for us to investigate, which Kyoko still is going to do because Makoto is too much of a pussy to touch the dead body again. This is life or death, Makoto. You can stand to look at the corpse. We can determine a few things from actually investigating the body. For one, the other wounds on her body are at least a few days old and very lethal. We can determine that every other wound on the body was inflicted after death. meaning that the blunt force trauma, the stabbing, and the explosion are all irrelevant to the case and were done to the dead body solely to throw us off the trail. Since the wounds are at least a few days old, we can determine that the murder took place at least a few days ago. So, any and all alibis and suspects go completely out the window. The other information we get is that the body lines up with all of Mukuro's measurements and vitals, so we can confirm for sure that this body is Mukuro's. Monokuma also confirms that the killing game began with 16 students, however there are only 8 corpses in the cadaver. If you're following along, there should be 9 bodies: Sayaka, Junko, Leon, Chihiro, Mondo, Taka, Hifumi, Celeste, and Mukuro. I've heard some people argue that Mondo is butter, so there's no body to put in there, but we never actually see the bodies, so who's to say Monokuma wouldn't just put the tub of butter in there. Also, it's a little detail to get stuck on. We also fully don't know if his entire body was turned into butter or how much of it is there, I don't know. But that aside, there's a body missing. That's the one key we need to know to unlock everything in this trial. With that, we're called to the final class trial. Everyone is suspicious of everyone because of those hints Monokuma gave us. The pictures with one person missing. Well, other than Kyoko. Kyoko would never fall for such a dumb trick. Everyone was given the picture without themselves in it, so everyone suspects that everyone else is working together other than themselves. We can easily debunk this by showing all the pictures to each other. Another thing that Makoto actually picks out about the pictures is that Junko's face is covered in all of them. And Makoto actually finds this out. He uses his brain. This is huge character development. Kyoko, are you proud? But what can we determine from this? Well, this is when the mystery actually starts, using a lot of context clues and hidden hints along the entire game. Mukuro was killed at least a few days ago, however there's only one body missing, and we know for sure that there are 16 students in the school. But the cause of death should sound familiar to the player if they remember all the way back to the beginning. The cause of death was several wounds made across the body, impaling the victim, made with something thick. There's also one student's death that was different from all the others. Junko was killed by Monokuma, impaled with sharp, thick metal spikes. So we might determine that the dead body we found wasn't a new body, instead it was the body of Junko that was set up to make us believe that someone new had been killed. The cause and time of death both line up with Junko and explains the missing body. However, we also determined for sure that this body was Mukuro. We know that the body belongs to Mukuro, considering the tattoo and the measurements in her file. Also, if you had the idea that Junko might be a key component before this trial, you might have looked over Junko's profile file in the menu. Her vitals and measurements perfectly line up with Mukuro's. This isn't a coincidence. But if all of that lines up with Junko's measurements and cause of death, what does that mean? What it means is that the body that was killed at the start of the first investigation was Mukuro, but we all thought she was Junko. There's actually a line hinting at this towards the beginning of the game. When we first meet Junko, or Mukuro in this case, we say that she doesn't look like her pictures in magazines, and Junko shrugs it off and says it's Photoshop. We have no reason to doubt her at this point in the beginning of the game, but it becomes very obvious why she did this once we get to the end. That isn't Junko. Mukuro was disguised as Junko. We can determine through all this evidence and the fact that Monokuma purposefully hid her identity in class pictures. He also cut out the video feed to stop us from seeing Junko's real face during the interview. The reason is because if we saw Junko's real face, we would instantly know that the person we met at the start of the game wasn't Junko. This can also be foreshadowed by the fact that we've seen Junko's real face on magazine covers, but Mukuro in the class photos has freckles and the same eye color as well as the same expression as one of the Junko sprites from the beginning of the game. This mystery was clearly set up very intentionally, and it's clear of that on a replay. So what does that reveal? There's still no one else in the school other than the original 16 students, and Mukuro was killed disguised as Junko, meaning that Junko Enoshima is still hiding somewhere in the school, and in other words, Junko is the mastermind. In my opinion, this is the coolest reveal about the 6th trial. It was set up very intentionally since the beginning of the game, and it gives a satisfying and interesting conclusion to how one of the students could have been working with Monokuma while participating in the death game. This twist solves the answer of who the mastermind is in a nice way, though the rest of the mysteries might leave some room for improvement. With the mastermind solved, Junko enters the courtroom. Junko is a fan favorite character and a very eccentric personality that it's a little hard to analyze if I'm being totally honest. The reason is because Junko's personality switches between a few character tropes, including a teacher archetype, a deadpan teen archetype, a queen and uwu cutesy archetype, the depressed archetype, the hardcore swearing archetype, I guess, the Mondo archetype if you will. There's also one with her using a Monokuma voice and holding up a plush of him as well, which also can explain why she was using such an eccentric character in this game to get the students to kill each other. He just happened to be one of her many characters. She also seems to use what I assume is her normal voice and tone when she's being serious or annoyed. This voice is a bit of a valley girl and teenager-like. She also calls hope and friendship uncool. She's obsessed with the idea of despair, something that makes a lot of sense considering she's running a death game. Let's talk about that actually. The death game, or battle royale, genre was popularized in 1999 with the Japanese novel of the same name, Battle Royale. Insert Fortnite joke here. Oh, I actually just wrote that. I didn't... Whoops, I don't have a joke. This novel was about students being set on an island and forced to kill each other. The premise is a bit similar to Lord of the Flies, except it really has opposite themes. Lord of the Flies follows the theme that without organized government, people will turn to violence because there's chaos in their hearts without order. However, Battle Royale has students that are put into a killing game by the dystopian fascist government of this fictional world. Anything that they would consider to be immoral is banned. The rules are also very strict in Battle Royale because they're not supposed to prove a point to anyone like Junko's rules. For example, someone must die every 24 hours, otherwise everyone is killed. This is much different than the motives in the first Danganronpa games, which simply nudge students to kill each other using a selfish motive, but nothing life or death. Battle Royale also includes an island which slowly opens up to the students as the game progresses, similarly to how the floors of the school of Danganronpa open up the more another is killed. There's a lot of similarities between these two works that put Japanese students into a bloody death game against each other. Of course, the biggest difference between these two are the motives. Every death game has to have some kind of motivation behind it. In the Hunger Games, it's for the appeasement of the rich by giving entertainment to the upper class and punishment to the lower class for their previous rebellion. In Squid Games, the games are meant to monopolize off of the lower class's desperation for money to fuel their entertainment. While both of these stories are meant to criticize the class divide, Battle Royale is made to criticize the education system in Japan. In Battle Royale, Japan faces a high unemployment rate, so the so-called delinquents of junior high are sent to an island with only one coming out alive. This can be seen as an allegory for the cutthroat grading system in Japan, which ranks all these students based on test scores. The death game is a metaphor for the bottom half of the group needing to fight each other in order to secure a top spot. You can only get a good grade if everyone else does worse than you. Danganronpa has a much different message considering that these students are considered the best of the best, quite the opposite of Battle Royale. We also get a much more personal connection with all of the students because there are only 16. In Battle Royale, there are around 40 students killed in the novel. In Danganronpa, we feel the deaths much more because we all know the students that died. So what is the reason for having the death game? Junko argues that reason is despair. The reason that there is a death game is because the students of Hope's Peak Academy are a symbol of hope in the future of society, and Junko means to crush that hope. It's much more similar to Lord of the Flies in this vein, where the themes are closer to order and chaos more than any class system or education system. Instead, there's an ideological study of someone testing out their philosophy, almost similarly to Joker in The Dark Knight. Though I can't really say Danganronpa has complex themes. The theme of this story is hope and despair, with Junko believing that despair is good and hope is bad. That doesn't quite fall in line with the Joker's mentality of humans are selfish deep down, or the Lord of the Flies theme of humans are inherently bad without societal rules. Junko's claim is far too simple to be taken seriously. Both Junko and the game's creator confirmed that Junko doesn't have a solid reason to start the death game other than her love of despair. She does ask the class if they think her tendency to get bored easily and apathy towards the world is a disease. It also is said that despair is the emotion that Junko enjoys the most, if not the only one she can feel. In the end, the point she's trying to prove could be interpreted as despair will always win in the end, opposing our belief that there's always hope for the better. This is made clear through Junko showing a dystopian world outside that has been taken over by her. So, no, I don't really know how she did this. Yes, I know that supplementary materials go into this a little bit more, but really, it's not a lot. Now, this game asks us to suspend our disbelief a considerable amount. The blood is neon pink, a student made a working AI that might be able to pass the Turing test, and riding around on a motorcycle turned this guy into butter. Sure. However, this game sets up a considerable amount of questions that it doesn't have answers for. Sometimes this is okay in media, and there are some questions that are interesting to leave open to the viewer. However, this third trial raises a lot of questions that Junko knows the answer to and refuses to tell us. It's almost Lovecraftian how they talk about the tragedy, which led to this dystopian future. We do know that something bad happened in the school that led to a lot of students' deaths, which then kicked off a worldwide movement. However, we know so little about these events that they're very hard to take seriously. Junko claims that this was all planned by her and her sister, that the air outside is horribly polluted, and that she installed heavy weaponry outside, as well as the fact that the general public will try to kill the students if they leave. The air is so polluted that Junko claims the air purifier in the school is keeping them alive, and it will turn off upon her death so they can't stay in the school. That's a lot, and we're never given a solid explanation of why Junko has this much power. What did she do to rally the masses like this? Now, the games, anime, and books all have several explanations like her natural charisma, brainwashing, and that it's all fake, multiple reasons. However, in this game, we aren't given any hints to how two high school students managed to pull this off. So Junko has already taken over the world with her ideological revolt of despair. She's broadcasting the murder high school to the world, and though a few people have tried to save them, they haven't been able to do anything. More importantly, there's photographic evidence of everyone having experiences with each other in a school setting, and there are notebooks of two people who don't remember writing them. Also, no one here remembers meeting each other or the catastrophe that happened at Hope's Peak or in the outside world. Everyone except Genocide Jack, that is. She remembers it because she has a different memory than Toko. When she is blacked out, the other retains memories for themselves. So using this information, we learn that something has happened to our own memory. We somehow lost 2 years worth of memories, 2 years worth of our school memories, meaning that we already met and came to know each other as classmates before our memories were erased and we started killing each other. We also agreed to stay in Hope's Peak until further notice, possibly forever. This is cool in concept, and it makes sense how Junko would know everyone's secrets and be able to make motives tailored to the students. She came to know these people for 2 years. Also, the classmates themselves boarded up the school and set the school up. I'd like to think that Junko had help from Chihiro to make Monokuma. There are sketches of Monokuma on the blackboard and even a sculpture of him, so I'd like to think that Monokuma was a little character that Junko created and shared with the class. They all could have thought he was just a funny little guy and a mascot for their class and gone along with him. It's possible they could have made a robot Monokuma to waddle around before Junko made some modifications to him. You know, like a bomb. If you manage to suspend your disbelief enough, the themes of this final trial are hope and despair, more specifically, hope for a better future versus the despair that this is the best things can be and giving up. The game is very over the top with these things, to the point where just by saying hope and despair, it probably made some people who played these games groan a little. Junko's motivation is entirely ideological, meaning she really wants to hammer this home. And look, if I set up a death game over the span of 2 years and learned how to erase people's memories and set up extravagant executions and a courtroom and multiple robot bears, I would also want to make sure people got my message. But this is furthered by the point that Makoto is dubbed the ultimate hope against Junko, the ultimate despair. The premise is that the outside world is so dystopian and unlivable, and all these students have to go off of is hope for some kind of chance at a better world than the one they have, is the driving force. As Makoto, you insist that there has to be a chance that they can make a better world than the one they're in. Junko offers that for the final trial, if one of them votes for Makoto, only he will be punished and the rest can continue living in the school peacefully. Makoto doesn't want that to happen for obvious reasons, but also he believes that shutting themselves away from the world and giving up on escaping wouldn't be right. Makoto believes that there's hope for a better world and that they can face the future head-on together and survive. After inspiring all your classmates, you all vote for Junko and watch as she is executed through means of every execution method up to this point. The air purifier turns off like Junko promised, and the class is given a switch to open the door. The group is hesitant, but they're hopeful that there will be something outside the school and they can face it together. The door opens and we are left with a white screen. I'm fully okay with this ending being left open to interpretation. This story is about Hope's Peak Academy, why it was this way, and if we could get out. This game answers both of those questions, if a little vaguely. The question of the outside world is a whole different question. For this game, the group got out and we have hope that they will be okay afterwards. Whether that be because Junko is lying or because the world isn't that bad is up to the players. I don't think this game, or media in general, always needs to give their audience the answers. There is mystery, intrigue, and use for media literacy and analysis in having your audience come to their own conclusions. Some of the best pieces of media leave things open to interpret. However, I also understand that this is a mystery game, and some, if not most, players came in expecting a satisfying conclusion to the questions it raised. And Danganronpa does a good job of answering half of those questions. We know the who and the why of it all. We, however, are completely missing the how of this situation. Junko fully refuses to answer some of your questions, and her explanations are lackluster in some areas. For example, Junko and Mukuro were twins, but when asked why they have different last names, Junko responds, "Just make something up, the answer is boring anyways." In my opinion, this mentality is what takes away from the game as a whole. The game is so focused on the bigger mystery that it blatantly tells the audience to ignore the details, which can make a mystery game fall apart at the seams. What annoys me personally is the fact that if you don't have an explanation, you shouldn't be doing the twist. If Junko and Mukuro have different last names and the game doesn't want to tell you why have them be twins in the first place? You could have had them be stepsisters or just old friends. This twist was blatantly irrelevant and unexplained. This problem carries over in the overall twist too. Don't get me wrong, Junko as the mastermind is set up masterfully well, but the dystopian twist is elaborated on but never explained. If you didn't want your audience to question what happened and how one high school girl managed to launch an ideological revolution, you shouldn't have written it in. There were ways around this. The other examples of death games I talked about earlier have some underlying issue in the world. Be it a class system, a fascist government, a lack of society, whatever it is, there is a larger issue that caused society to collapse. Despair is not enough of an underlying issue to cause broadcasted murder of high school students, especially when that revolution is caused by one girl with a fascination for despair. I think there should be some kind of underlying issue in society therein if they're expecting us to buy this dystopia. Hi, editor's note again. I looked back on it a little more and I realized that there is a bit of an underlying metaphor about the education system that is in Danganronpa and the franchise in general. There is this idea that the outside world is so terrible, but the inside world is also terrible, and that it is this competitive death game very similarly to Battle Royale. This is meant to represent the cutthroat mentality in the education system as well as the outside world. That inside you have to fight to go to a good high school, a good college, and get good grades, while outside is also as bad with the brutal workforce. Granted, I think that's about how far the metaphor goes, in the first game at least. The second game has more to say about what happens to the students that aren't ideal high school students, that aren't the best at what they do and that end up burning out or failing. But this game serves as a representation of enjoying your high school memories here, but having to leave eventually and enter the brutal workforce, hoping for a better future and hoping that you can create a good future for yourself and your friends. The final decision, the one about leaving Hope's Peak Academy or going out into the real world, is a bit of a representation about students graduating. Because on one hand, students might want to stay in high school forever and are told that it's their youth and they have to enjoy it. It might have even blurred by to the point where students can't really remember it and they wish they could do it over again because their youth is gone now. However, Hope's Peak Academy shows to be a brutal place that doesn't value students' lives, and that the surviving cast needs to leave or else they'll be trapped in here forever, unable to move forward in their lives. I do appreciate this metaphor, but I do wish they had implemented it slightly better, considering the reasoning for it is a bit nonsensical and fantastical. I do understand that this game expects you to suspend your disbelief quite a bit, and I do understand I've been harsh with it in the sense of reality and world building. I'm just nitpicky. I honestly think that this game has done a wonderful job of creating that metaphor and creating these harsh environments. And yes, the idea that one or two high school students could start this ideological revolution is a bit nonsensical, but also I understand that that ideological revolution is meant to capitalize on the despair and the tiredness of employees and students alike. It's the idea that the world is truly a bad place, that it doesn't care for you or your hard labor, that your work as a student and as an employee doesn't affect anything and doesn't affect the world, and they truly don't care about you. I think these are all interesting themes to go off of. and they serve their purpose very well, with Makoto representing hope and Junko representing despair, very obviously. But still, it's a representation of the hope for a better future, of a better world, of the ability to live on and to carry on in your life and make some difference, or to live happily. Okay, I think this is my last editor's note. God, this video is too long. For every one thing that Danganronpa sets up masterfully, it completely barrels through another mystery with no caution or regard for the legitimacy of its gameplay. There are some mysteries that feel incredibly thought through and interesting. If nothing else, the characters in this game feel very intentional. The creator of this game created executions for every character and went in not knowing who the culprits and the victim could be. This leads to creating complex characters with motivations, fears, and flaws out the gate. The trials that we remember are the ones that focused on character motivation, like Sayaka and Sakura. However, there is something about this game that seems to want to be a book. It often feels like the writers wrote stories that would make sense for characters and what would make sense from their own writing standpoint. The problem is that what makes sense in writing the murder might not make sense in the gameplay of solving the murder. The gameplay rarely takes the player into consideration. It's a bit of a problem considering this is a video game. However, I fully understand why this game is so well loved. For every clue it fumbles, it also sticks the landing on several emotional beats. This game is very intentional about getting you to warm up to the characters. It also sets up the main antagonist from the start of the game and follows through beautifully while being able to throw its audience off the scent. Really, this game has a lot of heart and put a lot of effort into very specific places. I do wish the love put into this game had been more equally distributed. The second and third trials feel like they wanted to get over with in order to get back to the overarching plot. And as the player, I also want to get back to the overarching plot. But I do think if they had woven the second two trials in with the overall themes and plot, the game could have gone a lot smoother and some of the bigger issues could have been easier to overlook. I do think it's funny that this franchise entered popularity again around 2020. Given that we did not have a lot to do and there's a lot to unpack in this game, it feels like a good time to return to it. Of course, not everything aged well. Some things aged horribly, actually. But I'm sure the people who got into Danganronpa during this time also felt trapped in a small place and like the outside world was a dystopia. I also think the message is very important that there's always hope for a better future. Sure, this game might have stumbled a bit, but it might be one of the more unique death game media that tried new things. The art style as a 2D game with some 3D aspects makes it jarring, the color scheme made it feel haunting, and the art style is very unique. I don't think anything can recapture Danganronpa. Frankly, not even Danganronpa. The overall aesthetic and novel concepts haven't been replicated by anything I can think of in the past 10 years. It's a very interesting spin on coming-of-age murder mystery and dystopia that brings something new into the gaming sphere even after all this time. I think it's good to take a look back at this media and question what went wrong but also what went right. Thank you for watching. I got a little carried away. I did not mean for this video to be so long. But here we are. If you're interested in visual novel style games or dating sim style games, I cover a lot of those, and if you couldn't tell, I'm a really big fan of just stories that are interesting, story games, all of that. If anyone wants to see me play Project Eden, the Danganronpa fan game, I'm so interested in that actually, but I'd like to know if other people are interested in it first. Or if it's any good. I don't actually know anything about it, so I could go in completely blind. I'm very excited. If you want some sort of reaction to it or an analysis of it, please let me know. You can check out my other stuff or wait for any of my upcoming stuff. I promise that more videos are sooner to come. This one took a long time because I accidentally wrote 25 pages about it. So thank you for watching. Goodbye!